CR 779 extract. A little regarding NT Nikola Tesla. Conversation between Ta from the Pleiades Federation and Billy Edward Albert Meyer. Billy Edward Albert Meyer, 779th contact. Wednesday, October 6th, 2021, 9:32 p.
There you are. Greetings and welcome, dear friend. Ta, I have some questions today that I've actually already put forth, but I need you to answer them again. Because I know that you don't make much effort to deal with such things, I am almost embarrassed to trot out the same again. But in the meantime, it has turned out that I may have answered something incorrectly, which is why I once again return to the same thing. It concerns namely whether the name Antonio Verzi or the like is known to you, because this man says that he has contacts with extraterrestrials. Also, I have here again the name of a man who calls himself Antonio Solitaria, about whom, however, I really do not know any more, as to what this name is supposed to mean. Maybe this is the real name of this Verzi.
First of all, greetings and thank you for your welcome. You really already asked me about these names when I was with you 8 days ago. No, the name is not known to me, I already told you, because on the one hand I don't deal with the frauds of supposed contactees with extraterrestrials insomuch that I would know all the names of such persons. On the other hand, persons who really had experiences with strangers do not know with whom they actually had dealings with. Consequently, a person accuses themselves of lying if they claim that they are in contact with extraterrestrials, because such contacts are not known to us, and simply because we do not concern ourselves with these things. If we have knowledge in this respect, then these are based only on foreordination, which are rare, however, because we do not deal explicitly with such things which are based as a rule on lies and deception. My statement, therefore, that which corresponds to my personal observations and practical experiences, thus these are such that I could not affirmatively respond to supposed contacts of human beings of Earth with extraterrestrial life forms, about which you just asked. Besides, we really deal only specially and exclusively with what arises around you and your person. What concerns other things regarding supposed earthly or Earth-human being connections or contacts to supposed extraterrestrials, that is not in our interest. Hence, we also do not deal with it. This was done by us in former times, when the interest on the Earth among the human beings was practically an era of extraterrestrial flying objects, the so-called UFOs. In response to your questions, we endeavored to do this and found that the case actually occurred with certain human beings of Earth, that they were abducted and examined by strangers and so forth. But the fact that actual contacts took place, like ours with you, that we could not determine. On the other hand, we know very precisely, namely, that it corresponds to the correctness concerning observations of flying objects of the strangers, as also that very good photo recordings and film recordings as well as other recordings of strange flying objects exist, which were made by human beings of Earth and are still made today, which are genuine, also with the modern speaking devices which are called cell phones. Also, military proofs of such photos have been made, but about that it is usually kept silent and this fact is denied, which is quite ridiculous because the fact still exists and can be proven. But what the real background of the whole thing of the strangers is, that is their business, and is of no concern to us. Consequently, we also do not concern ourselves with it, and also do not make ourselves recognizable to them, which our technology allows in such a way that our existence remains completely unrecognizable to them. We really do not want to have anything to do with these strangers in any wise, although we have explored exactly what and who they are in general. That is also known to you.
Shouldn't we talk once openly about who in particular and where the strangers are actually from? I mean, where they come from?
You know that our directives forbid this, and you yourself have to abide by them as well.
It was just a question.
But you shouldn't ask it.
It's okay. Maybe it was really thoughtless.
I guess it was.
It probably was, yes. But what about when you appear in my office? This is a question I was asked a long time ago, and someone was worried about it. But I always put it aside because I had simply forgotten about it. And besides, I didn't want to talk about it openly. Now, however, it has come back to haunt me. Isn't there the possibility that the strangers, for example, an intelligence agency, etc., can eavesdrop on what is being spoken, or see what's moving by some means? That is obviously causing problems, because it was also said that they were concerned that someone might break into my office if any of you are here with me in the office right now.
This is secured from the outside to such an extent, and I can say that because it does not jeopardize absolute security in any wise. However, you must not openly pass on and spread what I will explain to you under the condition of secrecy. It is really such that it is impossible to eavesdrop on our conversations, even if hidden listening devices of a futuristic nature are used, because we are careful that everything is really safe for you and us. This is so, because at each point in time of the contact visits and the conversations, etc., your workroom will be outwardly, due to our technology in such a way, that moments and happenings will be when you in your workroom. Thus, any eavesdropper or observer will only hear and see what has. In your workroom, but never what? When any one of us was with you. In your workroom. It has been set up like this since the very beginning in the center.
I didn't know that. That is indeed brilliant. But tell me, why was Elsie able to see Quetzal back then? Maria was once also the lucky one when she came into my office. Silvano also saw Quetzal above Pfeffikon, and he was also able to photograph him once over by the center steps. How does that add up? Then there was the incident in the living room over there with my ex.
You're getting a few things mixed up there, dear friend. Firstly, when Elsie saw Quetzal in your workroom, you yourself opened the door for her and let her go ahead when Quetzal was waiting for you in your workroom. With Maria, it was so that you had not locked the workroom door, and Maria simply entered. With Silvano on the forest path above Pfeffikon, it was such that he had secretly followed you, and the fact that he could take pictures of Quetzal at the center stairs, which was a foreordination.
Yes, that was probably the case. Anyway, Quetzal went wild, and Silvano had to destroy the negatives and the pictures.
That's right, yes. And the thing with your... I don't want to talk about that. In any case, our technology makes it possible, along with some other things that shall not be said openly, however.
Knowing some things about that may be good for me, because it gives, namely what you just explained, just a certain amount of security. It was really something that was troubling me and therefore should have been brought up earlier. But then we'll still talk about that privately, which I guess is important and should be discussed. But what do you think about these recordings that you have already seen some other time and said that they are probably real? They also remind me very much of what Nikola Tesla told me on a return trip with Sfath before he was murdered in the hotel in 1943, but which was then made to appear as suicide. One moment, please. So here again. What do you think about this today? The footage Michael has beamed to me on the computer. He is also concerned, therefore, if something goes wrong on this again, which unfortunately happens quite often. Besides, it's a little easier to write now since Yanarara and Zafenatpaneach were here and did something with a device that they used to work on my computer and keyboard. What they did, however, I do not know, but the whole of their work has brought good success, which, however, is only temporary, as they said afterwards. In any case, it's no longer like it was, because now there are fewer errors in what I write. Furthermore, errors occur only in every third or fourth word, and more importantly, less than before. The work which was done by the two of them, and what their 314 scientists have done, who deal with the crazy religious power block which has made itself independent and works against me, that is really a lot.
What shall I say to this? Because the work that is done by the scientists is superb, if you consider that they never knew anything before about these destructive religious energies that have made themselves independent. It was also unknown to me, as to all of us in general, because we do not know any religious belief and consequently no energies, that come about through such belief and cause terribleness, confuse the thoughts of human beings, and make them belief-dependent on a god or god-creator that does not exist. Our peoples were probably also believers in a godhead in much earlier times, but due to the big orb which suddenly appeared more than 52,000 years ago, this changed everything, of which you know more than we do, and about which you are not allowed to say anything. Today, all human beings of our peoples think, decide and act independently, without believing anything religious anymore. Consequently, also in daily life, everything has disappeared that corresponds to a belief of any kind, which is why all human beings nowadays get to the bottom of every matter before they accept something as truth. In this wise, lies and thus quarrels are also avoided, and peace reigns all around our world. Of course, there are disagreements under certain circumstances, but they never turn into strife and are settled before anything unpleasant can happen. Now, if the recordings which I see here again are genuine, and they seem to be indeed, then they show clearly what you already knew since that time when you saw with my father Sfath, that the invention of NT had fallen into the hands of the Nazis and had been further developed by them. That means what you knew, that NT's plans of the invention were found at the end of the war by the Allies and were further developed, as also the plans were passed on through espionage and their data were further developed, from which they came to fruition. If the Nazi researchers who were working on it at that time had been able to completely finalize the invention, namely before Hitler, together with his wife who had married him shortly before, was shot by his servants in his bunker in Berlin, then he would have become the ruler of the world with this weapon.
So that means that what was filmed here is real.
Yes, that is how I see and assess it. Only you should know that the plans were copied and secretly passed on as a result of espionage. Consequently, 2 nations have this weapon today, of which, however, not even the highest leadership of these countries knows something, but only the military and possibly also the intelligence agencies. But if this is really so, and it seems as if it is actually reality, then only certain few people are privy to it, including those who know how to operate this weapon, are unbound by friendship or marriage, and are monitored in such a way that they are immediately killed if they make the slightest noise to other human beings. We have seen this method in projects of clandestine nature, and therefore we know about them. Everything was handled in this form before the last war in such a way as well, that even the leaders of the state knew nothing about it, but everything was concealed from them. This happened because the who have their people even in the state leadership government direct everything secretly.
So really they switch and govern, hence the rulers who are at the helm, such as...
That's right. There are also people who act as advisors, whose advice is then implemented by the advised state leaders, and the acquired wisdom of what has been drilled into them, and advised by the advisors is dictatorially passed on to the population, who then usually unquestioningly follow everything and have no idea that they are not directed by the mightful ones officially at the helm, but by advisors, who in reality pursue completely different ends, Ziele, and are in turn dependent on those who work on their behalf as advisors.
While these then really even govern, precisely as a shadow government, which however nobody wants to admit.
Yes, and this also includes those people who are from the American sect, which also commits murders that are never solved, because every murder is concealed as suicide and assessed in their favor as suicide out of fear of the sect, or because the police and the judges guild themselves belong to the sect, as is the case especially in. This is because, on the one hand, the murder victims know too much and, on the other hand, suddenly pose a danger for the organization. Hence, those who know too much and who suddenly know are eliminated.
Then this here, from Block 4, page 55, when Simyase said at the 136th contact, "You know that for a very long time the sham people always achieved their determinations, Ziele, but always only by murder, pillage, friendship betrayal, and intrigues, etc., in which they, the ancient ancestors of today's Israelis, were truly masters. To this I replied, "Good grief. You have to be damn careful what you say here, because all this could be construed as neo-fascist and anti-Jewish. After all, you know that anti-Semitic machinations and the like constantly lead to lawsuits and even worse. The same is also in the predictions, namely in the books that were compiled in 1982 and 1996. What Simyase said, I understood then, as I understand it now, such that Simyase was simply repetitively saying that which has always been said since time immemorial and continues to be said. She repeated it in an unfortunate way, in my opinion, so that it seemed as if that was her opinion, which is why I made a fuss. Well, you know, both in connection with the Israeli intelligence agency and the fact that the Hebrews in the early days had made apparent friendship with the indigenous people at that time, but then had turned the gauntlet and had taken the land for themselves. Although it did not belong to them, new hatred was created. They had been promised the promised land, but it was the wrong land which the early ancestors of today's Israelis then took possession of. The founder of the Hebrano original people, or as they were called, was Abram. I don't know it exactly anymore, because it has been a long time since I have dealt with it, and besides, much of this and other knowledge has been lost to me because of the stroke. Unfortunately, only fragments come into my mind, so I can no longer bring together the exact connections. But I still know that the founder of the Hebrano, or as they were really called, was a dark-skinned man, a man from Africa. Hence he was therefore a different man than is claimed by the Jewish believers. Well, to my knowledge, what Simyase said at that time has nothing to do with the beliefs and the traditions as well as with the people of Israel today, but with the intelligence agencies of Israel as well as with their scientists and those in government, as well as, and especially, with the fact that since time immemorial the Jews in general have been defamed. Simyase then only repeated what has been said since time immemorial, without adding her own opinion. That is how I understood it at that time. Therefore what Simyase said, as it appears from sentence 97 and what follows, gives the impression to human beings, and that is why I am addressing this, because I was asked about it, that what she said was anti-Semitic, which I do not see in such a way.
That was indeed not the case, because my daughter Simyase only reproduced what has been generally said about the Jewish people since time immemorial, just as you only state the facts that you reproduce, without expressing your own opinion therein. This is inherent to us Plejarans. Hence we only ever reproducingly say something when it is a matter of what the general view or expression is. This is also clear from what and how she said everything. The statement is therefore to be seen, understood, and evaluated as completely neutral, as if you reproduce something that someone has said, without expressing your personal opinion about it. It was to be evaluated quite the same as if you had said it yourself in the wise, that you simply reproduce that which others have said, or what has been said since time immemorial. So it does not contain a personal opinion, as you yourself know and must have known at that time. When it comes to expressing our personal view or opinion, it is explicit that there is no doubt about it.
I had actually understood it at that time also in such a way, but I still had to say what I just said, because only too quickly is everything taken the wrong way with the earthlings and is misunderstood. They are just not used to simply reproducing something in such a way, just as it goes round and so forth.
This is not new to me because the human beings of Earth are too quick to misunderstand something. Besides, it is absolutely unknown to them that something spoken will be reproduced in such a way, as it is told or said by excluding one's own opinion thereby. Moreover, with regard to Judaism, the following must be said. It is not a phenomenon of modern times that enmity is harbored against Jewish believers. However, many forms of hatred of the Jews are new, and they are expressed in different ways. Very seldom is the hatred expressed openly, but rather often in disguise, as I know from studies of the modes of behavior concerning the human beings of Earth.
This is known to me. In addition, the hatred of Jews leads far back into antiquity. In phrases like one will surely be allowed to say that the Jews, etc. The criticism of Israel and Judaism are presented in a relativizing way as bad, although the whole of the people and the state of Israel is no better and no worse than any other state, because in the end, every country without exception became a state, and therefore became what they are today through murder and manslaughter. Even Switzerland is built on human blood, as history proves. At least that is well known. The denial of history and the whitewashing of the whole thing will not change anything. The whole of anti-Semitism is actually something that as a concept has long since reached the center of society, but which no one understands, which is why the question arises as to where anti-Semitism actually begins and where it actually occurs today. What does enmity toward Jews actually mean? And who are those who are actually anti-Semites? Today, the term anti-Semitism is considered as historical manifestations of hostility toward Jews, and ultimately it all ends in today's criticism of the politics and policies of Israel. The term anti-Semitism was first coined in 1879, this in order to scientifically understand a new form of the old traditional Judaism, and to racially justify the rejection of Jews. Consequently, this neologism resulted in a wrong and changed understanding of the Jews, who were no longer to be defined primarily by belief or religion, but as a particular race, and as a people who created their own nation. Anti-Semitism as a term is based on linguistic and ethnological distinctions that were coined at the end of the 18th century. With the term and concept of Semitism, an attempt was made to capture and devalue the nature of the Semitic peoples in order to create a difference to that of the Indo-Europeans. The Semitic and the Indo-European races, which formed their own language families, were thus divided according to their existence into Semites and Indo-Europeans, or even into Aryans. Thereby a conceptual narrowing was created on the one hand for the Jews, and on the other hand for the Germanic peoples. The Arabs thus inevitably also became a people of Semites, although today the objection is often heard that there is no Arab-Islamic anti-Semitism by definition. This is because it misses the point, because anti-Semitism is a distinctly anti-Jewish attitude, and moreover, Jewish deeds are Semitic, and thus, correctly meant, deviant. Anti-Semitism is fundamentally much more than just xenophobia, and rightly seen it is simply ethnically hostile and specifically aimed at Judaism, and in addition, it is also to be seen as a social and religious prejudice. The whole of anti-Semitism was considered in the 18th century, probably out of hatred against Judaism, as a modern worldview, but in truth it is unmodern or anti-modern, such that beams bend with shame. The very existence of the Jews is the cause of all the problems that have moved this world since time immemorial, because their beliefs and religious practices, as well as their craft of money and its handling, with which trade is also inevitably connected, is completely different from the usual. At least this is the view of non-Jews of all types and kinds. The anti-Semitism of every kind, which exists today, is founded in the unbelievable denial of the Holocaust, which was a monstrous humanity criminal work of the Nazis and a genocide, which is relativized nowadays. This is a work, which finds its equal nowhere else in the entire earthly human history. The right-wing extremist NSPAD further expanded anti-Semitism in the Third World War from 1939 to 1945. The First World War took place from 1756 to 1763, which is deliberately kept secret because the American government at that time was guilty of it with its warmongering actions which caused the worldwide war. Because under Adolf Hitler, the NSPAD took anti-Semitism to such an extreme that millions of human beings were murdered, not only Jewish believers, but also many others who believe differently, such as Christians, Muslims, Shintoists, and so on. The anti-Zionism that denies Israel the right to exist has actually been going on consciously or unconsciously since ancient times, precisely since the time when the ancient Hebrews conquered the Promised Land. In the new era, however, anti-Zionism arose later, with the effort of the latter actually amounting to an abolition of a really secured place of refuge for the Jews, and a persecution connected with it. Along with nationalism and the proverbial xenophobia of the neo-Nazis, anti-Semitism is also your mainstay of right-wing extremism and the ideological intersection of those who are extreme and radical, which includes the strict Islamists who have created a new situation of hatred against everything Jewish. Many people or even non-Jews do not know this even today, which is why they uncompromisingly take sides with the Palestinians. The right word is not Palestinenser or Palestinians, but Palestineser, Palestiners, as Plejaren scriptural scholars explain, partly in order to defame Israel, and thus all the Jewish believers in the anti-Semitic language of the non-thinking critics of globalization. The fact that anti-Semitism became an overarching moment for all forms of hostility towards Jews is specified by the fact that especially historically and politically, as well as religiously and psychosocially, aspects and additions are involved, which are so ancient and latently influenced/characterized/formed and moreover, undoubtedly Christian, as well as ethnic, racist, and secondary, but above all Islamic or even anti-Zionist, that precisely an anti-Semitism beyond compare emerges from it. This term, which is used very broadly and also vaguely, is in no wise unproblematic, because it suggests a historical continuity, that is to say a permanence, which vindicates an apparent enmity towards Jews. And if this apparent enmity towards the Jews is looked at and considered closely, then already from the biblical Haman up to Hitler, the connection of the Jews towards other peoples existed purely on a history of persecution. It is.
Pardon me for interrupting you, but this Haman, what is it? I am not familiar with it because I do not delve too much into earthly history.
It is actually not the earthly history, but that of the ancient Hebrews, which I address with the term Haman, if I still bring everything together and say it correctly. My memory has just diminished by quite a bit as a result of the stroke I suffered 3 or 4 months ago. The story of Haman tells, according to a biblical account, that the Agagite Haman was a central figure who is mentioned in the book of Esther of the Tanakh according to the Old Testament, who, as the son of Hamadatas, was with the Persian king Xerxes, who was actually called Ahasuerus. Haman was the highest government official before whom the royal servants had to humbly kneel. However, the Jew Mordecai, who according to the historical narrative was a cousin and adoptive father of Queen Esther, and served at the court of the Persian king Xerxes, refused to kneel before Haman. Consequently, Haman issued an edict with Xerxes, according to which all Jews were allowed to be plundered and killed on the 13th of Adar. Adar is Hebrew, and the 6th month according to the civil Jewish calendar. It is the last month according to the Jewish religious calendar, Adar beginning in mid-February for Christianity. This is actually what I want to tell you and reproduce from Hebrew history. Otherwise, everything would lead too far.
Thank you. It is also enough for me. It is really informative.
Well, then I can continue with the explanation of anti-Semitism, although I want to say in advance that I hold /have/keep/carry neither anything good nor bad in relation to a people, but am neutral in every respect, and remain so. That which I always denounce and call out refers only to arising or existing facts, and if I speak of a country and its errors or of improprieties and crimes etc. of a people or country, then solely and exclusively are those elements or even human beings meant, which fall into the frame of that which my speech or explanation is about. The Christians, that is to say, the believers of the Christian religion imagine themselves to be good and think that they are fine with the hatred of the Jews. But hardly any human being of this religious organization knows and is aware of the fact that Christianity is the original basis for the hatred of the Jews and the persecution of the Jews, and thus also for the Holocaust carried out by the Nazis. It is only the Nazis who are insulted and held liable for it, without wasting a single thought about the fact that they were nothing but Christians and gassed, shot and otherwise murdered millions of children, women and men in the belief in their Lord Jesus, while women and young girls were raped beforehand, which however has never come up for public discussion, and not to this day. Actually, every human being who believes in Christ should be ashamed and crawl into the ground, not for his or her belief itself, because stupidity is and remains a private matter, and one shall not interfere in it. But it must be allowed that one may speak about it, blaspheme and tell the truth. This also in the respect that either way the responsibility as a principle for the hatred of the Jews, the persecution of the Jews and the Holocaust, rests on every human being of the belief in Christ who has gone along with it and hung on to it, stuck with it, from time immemorial, as also today and tomorrow, and in all future, so that it will remain so, for all time. Hatred, persecution, and murder can be forgiven, but can never be undone, because what has been cherished, thought, done, and carried out has happened and cannot be undone again, not even if it is repaid with possessions and money, forgiven and forgotten. However, in order to make the whole thing understandable to those human beings who do not actually know why the hatred of the Jews and the false and defamatory statements of the Jews exist, which is still the case today, and quite often secretly, which all led to the persecution and murder and finally to the Holocaust by the Nazis, this should be explained once. Therefore I want to disclose it clearly and explicitly. And if all this will be denied by irresponsible ones, which still happens today, and is hardly or only rarely publicly known in blatant cases, then it happens nevertheless. The Jewish belief gives a substantialistic explanation of that, which already in ancient times, as well as in all places of the world, shows a constant nature of anti-Semitism, namely a view, which ascribes to everything a material, substantive existence given for itself, such as a philosophical teaching, according to which the soul is supposed to be a substance, a material, substantive nature. It is wrong, but it is sufficient to promote a hatred of the Jews, which is supposed to make comprehensible why their mere existence as a different group among other peoples is undesirable. The religious customs, characteristic of and singular only to Judaism, as well as the completely varying forms of the religious acts create a horrendous enmity toward Jews, because the mere rites, deviating from the form of normal worship, signify for human beings who believe otherwise, a phenomenon of deviation from the usual. The concept of endless anti-Semitism is accepted and cultivated by many other believers of other religions, especially by the neo-Nazis, who also make no secret of it, as do the other Jew-haters. All this has been absurd and at the same time dangerous since time immemorial, and the ancient image of the Jews, which has always moved between idealization and rejection, became murderously implemented by the later Christian cultic hostility to the Jews and by the German Holocaust. That is to say, nationalist racist anti-Semitism as an evil reaction to the foreignness of the Jews as a final solution. And, as can be explained, enmity against the Jews, especially in Europe, and despite their wide-ranging efforts to integrate into Christian society, trended to decline after 1880. And contrary to the assumption that anti-Semitism is supposed to last forever, functional explanations of anti-Semitism are directed to the fact that the forms and their contents, as well as the causes and purposes, zeala of enmity against Jews, would change in different epochs and regions in response to concrete social conflict situations and interests. This, because the entire thing would not necessarily and inevitably have to be connected with the behavior as well as with the attitude of the minority of the Jewish people. Of course, recognizable renewals must not be disregarded, because they were piled up, starting with the fact that they were accumulated from the early Christian accusations up to the racist images of the enemy. Thus it resulted that a stock of anti-Jewish motifs was built up, deeply anchored in the culture, which updated and functionalized it again at any time, just as it could be made uncontrollably functional again in every new epoch. The anti-Semitism, still present today but hidden, still secretly nurtured in its various forms, is difficult to understand for persons who are not familiar with the history of the Jews, especially with the history of enmity against Jews, in which a negative image of this people was formed, which has several layers. It is important not to forget the older layers of prejudice, the phases of which were overlaid by new ones, reshaped and adapted to the new situation, hence from the medieval usurers, as they were insulted, because the Jews were only allowed monetary transactions, which they learned to manage and master practically perfectly, grew modern financial capitalists. Something that, of course, did not suit the Christian world, and consequently the Jews continued to be reviled and hated. This is what I actually want to say and explain about the hatred towards Jewish believers, who simply follow their religious belief, even if it is wrong, as with any other belief, because no herb can be grown anyway to instruct haters of Jews, and to suggest to them that any form of hatred is senseless and contrary to all humanness, and only suitable to make strife, death and crime, murder and manslaughter, terror, insurrection and war, a reality at every opportunity. The religious enmity of the Christians against the Jews in earlier times, which was called anti-Judaism at that time, belittled the belief of the Jews and the Jewish people, and thus became an integral part of the Christian teachings early on. But with it also the Christian religious prejudice that the Jews were considered blind and obdurate because they did not want to recognize Emmanuel alias Jesus as the Messiah. On the contrary, the accusation of the murder of Emmanuel alias Jesus Christ was leveled against the Jews, which gave rise to Christian animosity with the claim that God personally had carried out the rejection of Christianity. For about 1,000 years, the supposed transformation of the very nature of wine and bread into the body of Emmanuel alias Jesus Christ has occurred and still occurs with the belief-based proclamation in Catholic religious teachings. This, however, according to the Roman Catholic theology, which believes that wine and bread at the Lord's Supper have really been transformed into the body, as well as into the blood of Emmanuel precisely alias Jesus. Additionally, the fear was hammered into the Christian Catholic population that the Jews, as enemies of Jesus Christ, would pierce the hosts and thereby commit the desecration of the hosts. With that, so it was seriously claimed, the body of Emmanuel precisely Jesus would be violated again. Furthermore, the blood of Emmanuel alias Jesus would be used by the Jews for ritual purposes, in order to be able to steal or buy Christian boys, after which they would be taken out of life by a ritual murder. These were threat fears at the time of the plague in the 14th century, with the fear of well poisonings also playing a role, which Jews were supposed to have committed as a demonic minority conspiring against Christians. Since the Middle Ages, Christian society has enforced a special occupational structure for Jews, thus strictly excluding them from all guilds and from all land ownership, as well as from government services. However, they were allowed to do business with dirty money, as a result of which the Jews specialized in money lending, and thus in the financial and commercial sector. The hate belief that the Jews would secretly operate a world conspiracy, and that they would have a secret and mighty, conspiratorial grouping, which would determine happenings all over the world, which is an assertion plucked out of the air. But this secret shadow government otherwise actually exists, however without Jews as contributors, because it is hostile to Jews and operates its greasy conducting work worldwide through advisors of those in government, without them knowing that they spend millions annually for consultations, by which they are guided according to the shadow government. An absolutely new thought was introduced by racial theories, according to which the theory was put forward that only a struggle for existence takes place, and should be connected with the fact that the survival of the fittest race can preserve the human society, according to which therefore every low race must be exterminated, and that exclusively only the higher races have a right to live. Since the 1880s, the racial question of the origin of the Jews has prevailed, which was previously based on religious or economic grounds. According to this, however, it is not so important that their origin has to be clarified, because in any case the Aryans are supposed to face the inferior mixed race, namely the Jews, in a historical final battle. In this final battle there should be only victory or elimination, wherein the victory is clearly predetermined and can only be on the side of the Aryans. According to this, it should then be the case that racial homogeneity is given for all times, with this then becoming the highest value compared to the racist invented racial and ethnic chaos. This should, again, an invention of the Jew-haters, supposedly very much accommodate the interests of the Jews. Hence they could finally become victors in the struggle of racial homogeneity, which would be a very evil suppression of fairness for the Jew-haters. According to racist imaginations, Jews even formed their body image from the weak duck-mouse moral coward, who, on the other hand, however, is supposed to be sexually osguarded, having gotten out of the control of a good kind, in order to keep the world population in the belief that they are cowardly and would not dare to openly demand the right they are entitled to regarding the right to life and existence. These, however, are those of the false dimensions of the anti-Jewish prejudice, which still haunt and remain effective in many Christian and fanatical Islamic brains to a greater or lesser extent in the present day. This is especially true for those who have current right-wing extremist ideas, goods of thoughts hammered into their skulls, or who have simply committed themselves to anti-Israeli, and thus anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. They do not know what the effective truth is, on the one hand, and on the other hand, that as a true human being, it is right and proper, above all, not to harbor hatred against other human beings, certainly not for the sake of beliefs. It doesn't matter what beliefs a human being or a people have, what tribe he or she or they all belong to, whether they have made errors in life or are guilty or not. They are and remain human beings either way. No matter in any case, every human being is a human being, and against none shall there ever be neither hatred nor any attempt to harm him or her in any way, no matter how and who he or she is, what he or she has done, and how and where he or she lives. Everything is his or her business alone, with which he or she alone and with his or her conscience must come to terms, even if he or she may need his or her whole life to do so. That is really all I have to say and want to explain.
Your word in the fallible one's ear? It was really good and right what you have said. But what is really going on with your writing now? What you have said does not yet put my mind at rest in such a way that I would not have to ponder over it.